Why do we tend to see beauty as something marginal to the really important concerns of life? And how can Dietrich von Hildebrand help us to answer these questions? But before bringing von Hildebrand into the discussion, let's first go back to Plato, for he was the first to tell the story of the loss of beauty and the retrieval of it. If you know Plato's Phaedrus, you know that Plato teaches that in an earlier life, before we began to live on earth, we were from time to time able to catch sight of beauty itself, which he understands not as some very beautiful thing, but as an infinite beauty that is the source of beauty in all beautiful things. This beauty of Plato is nothing but an aspect of the idea of the good, which is the supreme reality of Plato's metaphysics. Beauty and good are, for Plato, something divine. They are aspects of the God toward which he is groping. We Christians could simply say that they are names of the living God. Well, the beauty which we caught sight of in our pre-terrestrial life resonated so powerfully in us. It affected us so deeply. It engendered such life in us that, as Plato puts it in his mythical language, our souls grew wings. That is, they acquired a power of soaring in the world of the Spirit and of ascending to the things that are above. But since that happy time, we have undergone a fall, according to Plato, in which we have lost our wings and fallen onto the earth and forgotten the vision of the beautiful and of the good. It is arduous to find a way back to the good, but with the beautiful we are in a more fortunate position, Plato says, because the beautiful, among all the great forms, makes itself immediately felt through the senses, in particular the senses of seeing and hearing. When we see some beautiful human being and are drawn to love that human being, we are at the same time reminded of the divine beauty that was once our happiness. And we feel again the pull of this beatific beauty. The vehemence and frenzy of human love for Plato does not just come from inordinate bodily passion. It has a metaphysical source. It comes from the stirring and reawakening of a sense of divine beauty. Indeed, the lover will sometimes seem to be beside himself, mad, possessed. Plato teaches that this madness is a much worthier thing than one usually thinks, for it comes from the fact that the lover of beauty feels his or her wings growing again, breaking through the dead stumps where they had fallen off. It comes from an abundance of spiritual life breaking out in the soul that is moved by beauty. It comes from a reawakening of capacities and aspirations that the soul had forgotten. This then is Plato's account of how we lost our grip on beauty and how we can retrieve it. But what about us? The stirring of soul described by Plato seems to elude us. The encounter with beautiful things does not seem to reach so deep into us and to release in us Plato's divine madness. What holds us back? What keeps us from the life-giving encounter with beautiful things? What hindrance do we have to clear away in order to be nourished again by beauty as Plato was nourished by it? And here I come to the counsel of von Hildebrand. Many people today think that the best definition of the human person is homo faber, man the maker. That is, they would define man as the being whose life consists above all in making, producing, working. It is a life that consists in devising effective means for achieving our ends. It is dominated by utility, efficiency, productivity. We are only too familiar with and too influenced by the view that human beings live and move and have their whole being in the work world, and that they justify their existence by their productivity as workers. Von Hildebrand often drew a distinction, you see it in the introduction to his Aesthetics, between civilization and culture. Now he gives these terms a specially focused sense and says that civilization centers around elementary goods like promoting basic hygiene, building roads, warding off enemies, facilitating communication. Homo faber is constantly devising the best means for achieving these ends of civilization. His mode of thinking is instrumental reason. He knows how to make use of technology to advance civilization. I think von Hildebrand would recognize in the digital revolution a thing of civilization. By contrast, culture arises from a different place in the human person than instrumental reason and technology. It arises from the capacity of human persons to take an interest in things for their own sake, to delight in them for what they are in their own right. Thus, philosophy belongs to culture rather than civilization. Philosophical wonder has no place in the work world, but it is at home in culture. Josef Pieper makes this point very vividly, where in one place he imagines a marketplace where commodities are being bought and sold, and a philosopher enters the marketplace, stands up and cries out, "But why is there anything at all, rather than nothing?" And Pieper helps us to feel how incommensurable the philosophical wonder is with, you might say, the logic of the work world. But that philosophical wonder is entirely at home in the world of culture. Now, the same holds for the love of beauty, which also belongs to culture, not to civilization, in the special sense that von Hildebrand gives those terms. All deep experience of beauty has a contemplative note, for in this experience we are deeply receptive toward the beautiful. This is why we put down our tools and forget our busy schedules so as to dwell with what captivates us by its beauty. We step out of the little world of man, to borrow a phrase from King Lear, that is, step out of the work world and become aware of standing in a vaster space under a vaster firmament. We come to rest in order to dwell here with the beautiful and be nourished by it. We have to live a certain spiritual leisure, as Pieper has so admirably shown, in order to participate in any kind of culture, especially in order to be free for the beautiful. Nothing is more fatal to encounters with the beautiful than being eaten up by the feeling that there is not enough time for us to do all that we have to do. Now, in the narrative of von Hildebrand, what we see in the modern world is technological civilization encroaching on culture. Instead of letting culture be culture, civilization tends to dominate culture, to compromise culture by imposing instrumental reason on it. This, von Hildebrand says, is why, or at least one main reason why, we are incapacitated for the full experience of beauty. The organs of the human spirit that let us participate in culture have atrophied. The fascination of the new technological civilization has been too strong. We have lost touch with those realms of life that lie completely outside the framework and logic of civilization. We are too dependent on those structures of civilization that give us a reliable and predictable framework for our lives. As a result, beauty and the rest of culture is liable to seem to be a thing of marginal importance. Even Christians who should know better acquiesce in this hegemony of civilization. Just think of that puritanical Christian ideal. We all know it, according to which Christians should be frugal, they should be suspicious of abundance, they should be earnest, dutiful, averse to any kind of intense pleasure and delight. This is just the kind of deformation Christians suffer when they are taken over by the logic of civilization and cut off from the culture of beauty. They think that as Christians, they would lack seriousness if they were concerned with beautifying human life. They think that an awakened Christian conscience does not have time for beauty, but is rather completely taken up with providing for the basic needs of their neighbor and relieving the misery of the poor and the sick. Now, in the reading you have had from von Hildebrand, you see how he resists this conception. He appeals to the story of the marriage feast at Cana. The first miracle of Jesus is not a healing, but a miracle that heightens the festivity at a marriage, and heightens it with an abundance of good wine. Jesus is not a utilitarian who aims at a rational multiplication of benefits for the greatest number, but he acts here with extravagance, with divine exuberance. All that wine expresses not the adapting of means to an end, but it expresses what von Hildebrand calls the principle of superabundance. We see the same thing in the anointing of Jesus in Bethany. Here too we see not instrumental necessity, but superabundant excess. And as with the fine wine and the rich oil in these stories, so it is with beauty. It too is not instrumentally necessary, but is superabundantly enriching. Now, there's one very expressive way in which von Hildebrand articulates this for us. I admire this passage in his work particularly. He takes and expands the concepts of prose and poetry. This is in chapter 10 of the Aesthetics. And he says that life without the aspiration for beauty is plain and drab and prosaic, whereas life with beauty is full of poetry and song. There is an exuberance of heart and soul that can find its expression only in song. And it is an exuberance born of the encounter with beauty. There is no such thing as a deep experience of beauty that expresses itself only in prose. That experience of beauty cannot fail to break into poetry and song. Von Hildebrand argues that we human persons are not fully alive when our existence is entirely prosaic. An abundance of life is released in us when we become musical in the presence of the beautiful. And this holds eminently for Christians. The joy of the Christian is a musical joy, a joy that comes from singing a new song to the Lord. We see then how un-Christian that puritanical ideal of Christianity is that I just mentioned. It is a Christianity deprived of joy. When Hildebrand says again and again that Christians will have nothing winning about them, they will have no power to fascinate and to attract if they do not feed on the beautiful and acquire a certain spirit of song in their being. Now we can go a little deeper into the spirit of song if we bring in von Hildebrand's philosophy of the human heart. One of the richest parts of his personalism, his philosophy as a whole, is his rehabilitation of the human heart. He understood deeply that it is not enough to will the good of another person. We don't really love that person unless we are affectively moved by him or her and take delight in him or her. Only by way of delight do we turn to the other with our whole being and become fully present to the other. Von Hildebrand has deep insights into the sense in which the human heart, the center of affective life, is, as he says, the true self of a person. Now, let us bring together his aesthetics with his philosophy of the heart. What is it that stirs my heart toward another, if not a glimpse of the beauty of the other? My heart sleeps as long as I exercise instrumental reason within civilization, and my world remains the world of prose. But in the encounter with beauty, my heart awakens and sings, and I quicken into life as an affective being. Now, from what we have said about the indispensability of beauty for us human persons, its life-giving power, an important pedagogical principle follows, namely, that beauty has great formative power in the education of children. Sometimes Christians think, am I being heard in the back there? The sound seems to come and go. Sometimes Christians think that think of education in terms that takes too little account of beauty. They say children should be given the basics of education, the ability to read and write and to count, and that they should be taught the catechism and taught moral precepts. But Christian educators sometimes fail to notice the great formative potential that the experience of beauty has for children. They must not lose sight of the pedagogical wisdom of Plato, who says in the Republic that beautiful music has a power of entering into the soul of the young person and imparting grace and harmony to it, even as, Plato adds, ugly music has the power of deforming the soul of the young. And Plato makes it clear that it is not only musical beauty, but all kinds of beauty that have this formative power. He goes so far as to say that the experience of beauty disposes the soul of the child to welcome reason when reason begins to awaken. In fact, he teaches that the beauty of which he speaks is deeply akin to the good, so that the child who is bred to respond to the beautiful is thereby sensitized to all that is good and right and worthy. The child is enabled by the experience of beauty to know good and evil by a kind of connaturality even before it receives detailed moral instruction. This Platonic wisdom is also a Christian wisdom. We Christians should reject the idea that the experience of beauty is just a matter of amusement for children, a kind of pleasant diversion, and that even the worst music can do no real harm. We should rather think that the human soul is so profoundly made for beauty that it can be deeply formed for the good by the early experience of beauty, but can also be deeply deformed by the early experience of what is sordid and ugly. And I come now to my final thought, and that concerns the aestheticist perversion of beauty. Beauty often has a bad name. When people, hearing of beauty, think of some kind of aestheticism. Now, what exactly do we mean here by aestheticism? Take this example. Suppose someone were to say that the life and death of Jesus in the Gospels is a beautiful story, but that we need not be concerned with whether it is also a true account, with whether he really rose from the dead. Such a person would show the most deplorable aestheticism. Considerations of beauty would somehow eat up and push out considerations of truth. But the possibility of an aestheticist corruption of the experience of beauty should not obscure for us the profound human significance of an authentic, rightly ordered experience of beauty. After all, every good and worthy thing can be taken in a disordered and destructive way. The love of justice can go to the extreme of ignoring mercy, and the love of mercy to the extreme of ignoring justice. The love of beauty is not intrinsically aestheticist. Once beauty is loved in the right order, and once full respect is shown to the good and the true, then the love of beauty shows itself to be no less important for the human spirit than those other great loves. Von Hildebrand focuses with precision on the root of the evil of aestheticism. He says that the aestheticist takes beauty only as subjectively satisfying and fails to recognize it as a thing of intrinsic value. This is why aestheticism smacks of self-indulgence. For von Hildebrand, value is something objective and real, something worthy of, calling for an appropriate response. Delight in aesthetic value, therefore, draws us out of ourselves and elevates us. He writes in the introduction, and let me quote him here. He says, the encounter with beauty, lifts us above all that is base and common. It opens our eyes to the baseness, the impurity, the wickedness of many things. It frees us of captivity to our egoistic interests and undoes the fetters of our hearts, releasing us from the wild passions that convulse them. End of that quote. Whoever experiences beauty in this way is under no suspicion of aestheticism, for such a person knows how to live beyond the merely subjectively satisfying and knows how to venerate the beautiful. And I might here, in concluding, mention Dietrich von Hildebrand as a personality, not just as an author and a thinker. Just in connection with aestheticism, it seems to me natural to bring in my memory of him as a personality. He had a lifelong passion for beauty. He was raised the son of a famous German sculptor in Florence, in a highly artistic family, and from his earliest years nourished by beauty in art, especially beauty in music. It was, for me, an unforgettable experience to listen to him, with him, to a piece of music that he loved. I've never seen anyone experience music so strongly, so physically. Never have I seen such a radiant look in one listening to music that he loves. He experienced not just in his spirit, but it seemed in his flesh and bones, that glimpse of divine beauty that is given in all great art. He deeply experienced in himself the budding of spiritual wings in the presence of the beautiful. He understood within himself all that Plato teaches about the longings for eternity that are awakened by the sight of the beautiful. He abominated the idea that beauty is just a thing of decoration and ornamentation. And when he found Christ, he converted at the age of 24, he was captivated by the beauty of the God-man. He was captivated by the beauty of the holiness of the saints. His was a conversion in which the beauty of revelation played an unusual role. And yet, there never was a lover of beauty less tainted by aestheticism than von Hildebrand. Already as a boy, when he was taken by his family to see the artistic treasures of the churches of Italy, he would refuse to walk through the churches as a mere spectator of their artistic beauties. He felt a need to genuflect before the altars, though he had as yet no knowledge at all of the reservation of the Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle. He sensed all on his own that an exclusively aesthetic attitude was inappropriate in a place of worship, however much beauty there was there to be admired. Later in life, he became an eminent moral philosopher, and his sense of good and evil was never compromised by an aestheticist attitude. He knew, in a way in which few have known, how to utter a yes that was yes and a no that was no. In the personality of von Hildebrand, one can see how the Platonic passion for the beautiful can be lived with the greatest intensity and lived without any least trace of aestheticism. And so I conclude. Man does not live by bread alone. He does not live by civilization alone, but by culture. He does not live by productive work alone, but by contemplative delight in the beautiful. He does not live by prose alone, but by poetry and song. Thank you.